Well, hello out there and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, and I'm so pleased that you've chosen to tune in for tonight's event, a panel discussion on the topic of housing in Windham County, Vermont. This event is part of a larger exploration that our museum has been doing into the nature of homelessness here in our community and beyond. That exploration has involved two exhibitions that are on view in our galleries right now. One is called Stephen Kinder, 552,830, which was the number of people experiencing homelessness in the United States in the year 2018. And the other exhibit is Coffee and Conversation, Stories of Homelessness, which features photographs and video of conversations between people with stable housing and those without. This project has also involved a number of events in addition to tonight's panel discussion. Back in August, we presented a virtual tour of the Stephen Kinder exhibit, and we also hosted a conversation with photographer Michael Christopher Brown, who's been documenting life on Skid Row in Los Angeles. And then last month, we presented a talk by Kurt White, a therapist at the Brattleboro Retreat, titled Insight: What the Unseen Are Holding for Society, and also a talk by Dennis Culhane, a national expert on homelessness. His talk was titled Homelessness, the Big Picture. Videos of all those events are available on our website, brattleboromuseum.org, and also on our YouTube channel. You might wonder why the Brattleboro Museum, a contemporary art museum, is doing a deep dive into the topic of homelessness. The answer is that we believe that art can sometimes provide a perspective on a challenging topic that allows for greater understanding, empathy, and occasionally even creative new solutions. That's what we hope to achieve with a project like this. And it's what motivated us in recent years to present exhibits and programs having to do with such topics as addiction and recovery, gun control, and other difficult issues. This kind of social exploration is not all we do by any stretch, but it's one way that we believe we can be of value to our community. The way this event is going to unfold tonight is that I will leave the screen shortly, and Josh Davis, Executive Director of Groundworks Collaborative and tonight's moderator, will come on along with our 5 panelists, and they'll get the discussion underway. When the panel discussion ends, there will be a Q&A, which we hope you'll participate in. If you're here tonight via the Zoom link on our website, there are 2 ways you can participate. You can type your questions in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to be unmuted and ask your question yourself rather than typing it in. If you're watching this event tonight on Facebook Live and you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please just use the comment box there on Facebook, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. Okay, before I have Josh and the panelists come on, I just want to say a special thank you to the museum's events manager, Jessica Nelson, for taking care of all the behind-the-scenes business necessary to make this event possible. And I'd also like to thank the Thomas Thompson Trust for their generous support of this project and so many other worthy causes in the Brattleboro area. And finally, I want to recognize Groundworks Collaborative, an essential nonprofit organization in Brattleboro providing food and shelter to those who need it. Groundworks has been an indispensable partner for the museum in organizing these exhibits and events. This event tonight is free, but if you're so moved, I would ask you to please consider making a donation to Groundworks, which you can do at groundworksvt.org/donate. And I will send that link out in the chat in just a few moments. And with all that said, it's now my pleasure to welcome Josh Davis, Elizabeth Bridgewater, Adam Grinold, Emily Kernheiser, Bill Murray, and Dan Yates.
Good evening. Danny, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. And thank you too for the support that you have given Groundworks, not only tonight, but over the last couple of years. And so Jessica and everyone else at BMAC who've been involved, especially in this exhibit and the events that are a part of it. We're really happy to be a part of this latest installation. And we're welcoming the opportunity to look at the issue of homelessness from a few different vantage points. As Danny said, this conversation tonight is going to tie into previous conversations. We were here just 2 weeks ago with Dennis Culhane, and you're going to hear threads of Dennis's discussion that are going to make its way into tonight. And we're using this opportunity to dive into the issue of homelessness and try to move the conversation beyond narrowly focusing just on the people who are experiencing homelessness, but rather trying to look into the complexities of how homelessness has become an acceptable outcome of our housing system. And I want to provide an opportunity for people who are joining us tonight that may not be experiencing homelessness to engage not just in personal reflection, but to provide an opportunity for a deeper understanding that we will hope will ultimately lead to action and advocacy focused on ending homelessness. 2 weeks ago, Dennis Culhane named 4 primary contributors to homelessness. He talked about housing, the labor market, social welfare system, and other population factors that contributed to homelessness. Tonight, we're going to take the issue of housing, and we're going to look at it specifically in the context of Windham County and put that under closer examination. As the director of Groundworks, which is an organization working with people experiencing homelessness, we have a perspective of how the housing system leaves some people out. As is true in other social systems, those that fall outside or are on the fringe are the ones who bear the brunt of inequitable systems. We started talking about having this panel discussion back in the spring. It was an idea that this exhibit was going to be a spring exhibit, but because of COVID, we had to postpone. And in terms of housing, we've had an amazing opportunity in Vermont because of COVID to house the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness through the Vermont Emergency Motel Program. So in Brattleboro alone tonight, we have about 150 people who are sleeping in motels. It's an amazing accomplishment and one that should be celebrated and one that we have celebrated. And at the same time, it exposes one of the shortfalls of our housing system. Now, Groundworks and other agencies in this area and throughout the state are faced with the challenge of supporting people moving from the motels back into housing. And despite in the moment that we have unprecedented resources to support those efforts, finding the housing to move people into is proving to be and continues to be an incredible challenge. While I am always optimistic and ambitious, tonight we're not going to solve all the issues that I just put on the table. But my goal is that we will gain a deeper understanding of the local housing system. And specifically, I'm going to ask our panelists a couple questions, really basic questions, to have them articulate their perspective of the housing system. And then we're going to open up the discussion to questions and input from you all that are joining us via Zoom or Facebook Live. The richness of this discussion is really going to come from those questions, and I'm looking forward to getting to that. But before we do, we get to hear from each one of our esteemed panelists that have joined us tonight. And so with the first question, I'm going to move down the line and give each of you a couple minutes, starting with Elizabeth, then Dan, then we'll go to Adam, Bill, and then Emily. And the first question of the evening is, please tell us your name, a little bit about your work, and what housing looks like through your lens. Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And I want to thank the museum for organizing this and Josh for corralling us all together. This is obviously a really important topic for us at the Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. I think you can see my name on the screen, but it's Elizabeth Bridgewater, and I'm the executive director. I've been in the role for about 2.5 years after our long-term founding executive director retired. So our mission is to strengthen the community of southeastern Vermont through the development and stewardship of permanently affordable housing and through the ongoing support and advocacy of its residents. That's our mission statement. And we have a number of programs. We're kind of an organization that focuses both on supporting renters and homeowners. And I'm just going to walk you through very quickly what our programs are. And then when we get to the next set of questions, I'll share some of my insights of the housing system. So one of the core programs that we have is real estate development. So we either acquire and rehab properties that already exist as a way of bringing affordable housing into the community. We also acquire land and build new housing through new construction. We do about a project and a half a year, and our project sizes range from 18 apartments to 22 to 25. So that kind of gives you a sense of the scale that we're working in. Some of our most recent apartments in Brattleboro include the Snow Block in downtown, which was an infill development project that came online last year. Putney Landing and Putney and Great River Terrace in North Brattleboro. We manage about half of our portfolio. So in the greater Brattleboro area, we self-manage 358 apartments in kind of Brattleboro and the surrounding communities. We also have 42 mobile home lots, over 3 mobile home parks. And then we also own 483 apartments in Upper Windham and Windsor County. And those properties are managed by Stewart Property Management. So we have a third-party property management company that also we work with. 30% of our residents are supported by community organizations such as Groundworks Collaborative, SEVCA, Winston Prouty, Youth Services, HCRS, and then our own SASH program, which helps seniors stay at home as they're facing different challenges. 25% of our current renters were experiencing homelessness before they moved into one of our homes. So that gives you a sense of the range of people that we're serving. And then we also help homeowners. So we provide homeownership education and counseling. We help about 75 to 80 new homeowners buy homes every year. And then we also have a shared equity program, which provides a pretty substantial down payment assistance grant to folks buying a home. And we have 135 of those homes in our portfolio. We have a home repair program that helps people that already own homes repair their homes. We do about 60 home improvement projects every year. And we just, and I'll talk more about this later, but we just stood up a new program to help private landlords that own multifamily apartments rehab those homes in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So that kind of gives you the breadth and depth of what we're doing. We try to touch sort of every aspect of housing, and we do that over a fairly large footprint that includes Windham County and Windsor County, up all the way up to Windsor itself. So I'll stop there, and that's our summary, but I'm looking forward to the conversation as we get moving through the questions that you posed, Josh.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's really impressive to lay it all out like that. Dan, same question for you.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here tonight. My name's Dan Yates. I am president of Brattleboro Savings, a position I've held since January of 2008. It's a privilege that I get to lead an amazing organization of really wonderful people who are committed to our communities. And you know, when I think about housing through my lens, one of the things I see is this great gulf that exists between people who are, able to buy a home that, many people would never dream of being able to buy, and those who struggle to buy any home whatsoever. Mortgage lending is a big piece of what we do at the bank and helping people buy homes. In the last just over a year and a half, we have provided almost 200 mortgages for the purchase of homes in Windham County. And 36% of those went to people with low or moderate income levels. And so you think about that in terms of then almost 65% went to people who have higher levels of income. And these are people who are buying second homes over in the Deerfield Valley or up near Stratton. And I see this, there's a huge missing piece that I think we bear responsibility to try and find a way to fill, and that is, how can we help create housing that people who are making $15 an hour, even if there's two of them, $15 an hour with a couple of kids, be able to afford to buy a home. And that's a challenge that we would love to take on. In the meantime, I look at it too from the standpoint of how much of our housing stock is rental, and what that means for the economy. Josh, you and I talked before about 15 years ago when I came back to Brattleboro, we had 48% of our housing stock was rental. And there's a school of thought that suggests if you exceed 50%, there's some real economic challenges ahead for your community. And it wasn't too long ago that I saw an article in the paper that said we're at a 60% rental housing compared to 40% of home ownership. So we need to do something. I think there's an opportunity, which I can talk more about as we get into the next question, for us to be a part of that solution.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dan. And so, Adam, if we're not experiencing technical difficulties, it's great that you've been able to hang on there. There is some wind blowing across southeastern Vermont tonight that may knock some of us off of the call, and we're doing our best to stay on. But welcome, Adam. And
thank you. I was able to successfully relocate. I may have to relocate again, though. So please bear with me if I do go off screen. I'll be back. Again, thanks, Josh, for hosting this and moderating this today. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Jessica, for bringing this together. Such an important topic. For those who don't know me, my name is Adam Grenald. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. And in this role, I have the privilege of working with some amazing people doing really supportive work for the regional economy. Our current programs are designed to help strengthen businesses and increase the quality of life for all residents. And we do this by growing the region's population and workforce through both retention and recruitment efforts. So some of you may be familiar with our P3 program, which is our high school career program. We also have a college internship program. And then we have numerous recruitment programs that include our most recent regional collaboration, which is helping to build a regional system to support asylees, new Americans, and people of diverse backgrounds successfully relocate to our largely rural and white communities. And when we think about it, what do all of those things have in common? Well, of course, they require housing. And it's not just one type of housing that we really need. We need housing for all. So this housing has to be available in communities across the region, not just in our larger downtown areas. It must be safe, affordable, attractive to a wide range of residents. So if we can do that, I think we'll be in good shape, and I look forward to discussing that a little more deeply in following conversations tonight.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
And Bill, same question to you.
Hello, I'm Bill Murray. I'm a real estate broker. I've been working with Berkley and Veller Greenwood Country since July 6th of 1981, which puts me in my 39th year. And I've been particularly surprised by some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities that have landed in our lap with COVID-19. We've gone through spurts of varied activity over the 39 years I've been doing this with 9/11 was a challenging time. The stock market crash in 1987, though I realize some of the people listening might not have even been alive at that point. And this is another one of those unusual one of a lifetime episodes. And it's highlighting both the shortage of housing of all different price in all different price ranges in the area. But it's also highlighting just how important it is for people to have housing. And I think one of the opportunities it's presenting is it's challenging the assumption that everyone needs to, who works in an office, needs to go to an office to work. And for years, I've had people locally as well as out of state who've talked about wanting to live here, but have been questioning how they could ever afford to do it, how they could support themselves. And I think we're starting to see with the work at home movement, which I don't think is going to change. I think that's going to increase. And so I think that we're going to see continued pressure on housing, but I also see that as a real opportunity to try and figure out some ways to create new housing and have it effectively house a real wide variety of people. Because I think the strength of the community is not just its diversification in all aspects. And I think we'll talk some about that this evening.
Yes. Thank you, Bill. And Emily, welcome.
Thanks. I'm Emily Kernheiser. I'm a state representative representing Brattleboro District 1, which is mostly West Brattleboro. And so when I think about housing in West Brattleboro, we have, I think, some of the most diverse housing stock in the county in sort of a very concentrated area. We have the first and the largest mobile home cooperative in the state in Tri-Park. That's at Mountain Home. About a fifth of the folks in West Brattleboro live in Mountain Home. We have Melrose Terrace, which is a great example of what public housing used to look like, built in a floodplain. We have Westgate, which I believe is managed by Windham Windsor Housing Trust. And we also have some quite ornate second homes up Ames Hill, on Orchard Street, sort of on the dirt roads. We have some of the most expensive housing stock for primary homes in the area. And so it's and then we have also some really small sort of suburban style streets. And so it's a real mix of folks who are accessing housing in West Brattleboro. And then all sort of gathering together, sometimes with their kids going to school together, sometimes not. Some folks live in very ornate converted barns, and some people are living in barns that are not converted at all. And you can see all of that I saw all of that in the last election cycle when I was sort of knocking on everyone's doors, going around to the back, really getting a chance to see the full extent of housing in our community. But when I think about housing through the lens of my work in the legislature, it is much, much broader than where people live. It's really at the intersection of every single issue. And our housing scarcity and housing tensions are at the intersection of every single issue. And so I'll give just a few examples of that. When we think about climate and climate action and climate change and how to mitigate climate change in Vermont, really the two biggest leverage points we have for that is our housing stock and how we can change the way we heat our homes. And we have some of the oldest housing stock in the country and the hardest housing stock to heat. When I think about health and good health outcomes for our children, we have really high asthma rates. We have lead paint. And as we know with COVID, it's really hard to stay healthy in a pandemic if you don't have a home to retreat to. When we look at criminal justice reform, there have been study after study that we could bring home all of our prisoners who are in out-of-state prison if we had more housing, because we have people right now who are incarcerated who are eligible for release and are not released because there's nowhere for them to go live. When we look at agriculture and the pressures on our agriculture, our second homes and our housing booms in tourist areas really puts a lot of pressure on farmland. But at the same time, some of those homes that are privately owned is where our farmers get feedstock by haying. And so there's a real tension between those two things there. And the list actually goes on and on. Our child protection system is under tremendous stress. Windham County has the highest rate of kids being taken into state's custody. And a lot of that is because of challenges around homelessness. And so when I look at any challenge or any opportunity that we're trying to solve in state government or in our community here in Brattleboro, housing is right there at the intersection, and housing at every level of the market. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody. That was just the introduction. I'm sitting here furiously scribbling notes. I mean, just some of the major themes that we've laid down already is we have the Housing Trust, who's one of the most active developers, housing developers in the area. And at the same time, we have a shortage, named a shortage of housing throughout the entire price range, issues of access to buying housing, and then also thinking about housing as economic development and really a diverse economy and a diverse place to live. And then how so much of these relate to the immediate issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm going to encourage people to be thinking about their questions. If you're watching from home on the Zoom, which thread would you like to tease apart a little bit more? But before we get to questions, let's go back through the panel one more time. And we're going to reverse it this time, talking about, I think each of you have kind of touched on this already, is successes, challenges. I would add opportunities in there, bright spots, but also challenges. What do you face and run up against? And so in terms of reversing, Emily, it's back to you.
Thanks. So successes for housing. Your question, Josh, when you sent it out was, what would success look like around housing for me? And at this point, it really is people being housed at absolutely any point in the market, whether that is sort of affordable housing, whether that's called sort of the missing middle housing, which we have very little of, whether that is higher income housing. But because we have a crunch across the board, if there was just more housing in any of those areas, we would see a little bit of wiggle room in each of them. So at this point, success for me just means people being housed. It means people coming here with jobs, being able to find a place to live so that we can grow our economy. It means folks who are sleeping in motels right now or sleeping on the streets have somewhere to go that's safe at night. It means parents who are crammed into one-bedroom apartments with everyone working from home, and kids working from home can send their kids, can move somewhere where they can send their kids out into the yard. But it's really just like absolutely any housing, because we have this incredible crunch. We have the lowest vacancy rate in the state. We have the highest, the oldest housing stock. And so when I look at sort of challenges there, and I think we've all said them, you know, there's some problems around regulation, there's some problems around how much people are willing to pay, and I think the other panelists here are going to tease that out much more than I will. But where I see opportunities, we've had conversations about this pressure around tourism, the pressure around the flood of people who seem to be moving here. We don't have a lot of studies on that yet, but I think we'll probably talk more about that a little bit tonight. Buying up homes, you know, for cash. We're hearing rumors about people, you know, getting into bidding wars around housing. And so there's a lot of opportunities there to really rethink how we tax luxury homes, to rethink what current use means in our communities. So we have this whole mechanism around how we tax land in Vermont to keep it working lands, to keep it looking sort of in the Vermont brand spirit, you know, trees and fields and cows, and sort of how we sell ourselves to the outside and why so many of us love to live here. And so there's ways we could rethink some of that to really stay within the spirit of it, but free up a little bit more funds to move into other opportunities for housing, easing regulations and zoning in downtowns where we know it's best for the environment to be building, while making sure that we're protecting the outlying areas. So those are some opportunities I see, but I really know how careful we need to be in order to keep all of those factors that I was talking about, from criminal justice to climate change to agriculture. If we pull just one lever and forget how interconnected these systems are, we're going to cause even more stress to those other systems than we already see. And so that's what I'm trying to keep my eye on as we move forward.
Thank you, Emily. And thanks too for keeping me honest on the question. You're absolutely right. And so Bill, as we're coming back to you, what does success look like in your work? And if you want to add also, what's your greatest challenge in your work right now around housing?
Well, I'd like to follow what Emily was just talking about, because it's that balance that is so crucial, that any decision that we make about housing, how we pay for it, how we build it, where we build it, what kind of housing we build, all of that's interrelated. And no one thing exists on its own without affecting all of those other things. And I know for people who are trying to think about buying a house, they feel like the housing is too expensive. The sad reality is, the sad reality is that you cannot build a house and turn around and sell it and make money. There's no profit incentive to build houses here. I mean, there might be a few examples in some of the ski areas where that's not as much the case, but around Brattleboro, anyone who's built in the last 10 years, the amount of money that they spent to buy the land, develop the site, build the house, if they then turned around and wanted to sell the place, they probably will not get all of their money back. The good news about that is it's not speculative building that's going on here. It's people actually building houses to live in them. Thank God for Windham and Windsor Housing Trust. Thank God for the USDA loan programs, because people with modest incomes but good credit, and that's an essential part of the formula, are able to buy houses here. I bought my first house working with what was then called Farmers Home. It was the USDA program. I had been a school teacher. I got into the real estate business. I had incredible credit, but very, very low income. And I managed to buy a house. Debbie Boyd, who's now the head of the Brattleboro office of the USDA, was the secretary in the office at that point. And I spoke with her yesterday and we laughed about it. My subsidized interest rate was 13.5%. The price was dramatically lower, but the interest rate was huge. And so one of the things that I think people who are looking to try and buy a house or start is the availability of mortgage money at incredibly low, historically low interest rates, 3%, under 3.5%, under 4%, 2.5% to 3.5% interest, which is so low. And I'm not a big proponent of people borrowing money, except if they're going to put it into something that provides them housing and an ability to become a part of a community and feel like they set down roots. And frankly, that's been one of the real bright stories with the shared equity program that Windham and Windsor Housing Trust has, the USDA program, which are aimed at people who might not have down payment savings, but are steady workers, perhaps not at a huge salary or huge income. If they have good credit, these are vehicles that can really work. And I've taken tremendous pleasure out of helping people buy some of these houses. I mean, right now, the pressure is there's not enough housing for everyone who wants it. And so anyone who's working with one of those programs is perhaps at more of a disadvantage than they are when the market's in its normal, healthy place. Right now, the demand is so far beyond the supply. And so I think the other good thing is we live in an area where people are really interested in energy efficiency and climate change and all of the other challenges that brings in. So if you talk about R values, passive solar, solar power, all the things that I think we should be investing heavily in, people are already there. Buyers of property are already there. So we don't have that challenge that they have in some parts of the country to convince people that this is the way we need to go. The challenge is, how do we finance the creation of new housing that we can then sell to people at a price that they can afford to pay. And frankly, the low interest rates is really helpful. I mean, one other component of this that we haven't touched on is Vermont's demographics and Vermont's population base has been really stagnant, flat for 20 years. Many of us have just gotten older. And we're starting to see a little bit of an increase. Windham County had a loss, I believe, last year. So new people coming here to set up a life, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. People coming, bringing a job that perhaps pays a little bit more and might lead to them setting up a local company and hiring other local people. Those are all really good things. Someone needs to pay the property taxes and the state taxes that then comes back and funds the housing that we're trying to create. So I think that even though there's this incredible tension and stress about it, there are huge assets that we have to broker into trying to meet the challenge. The other part of it is an aging demographic. There are a lot of us who've been here for quite a while who want to stay here. And you look at Brooks House and people will say, oh, well, those are expensive apartments. Well, some of them are market regulated. Some of them are expensive, but many of the people who live there are people who've lived in the area for a long time, sold their single family houses and moved in there. And that frees up a little housing for somebody else. I think a challenge is going to be trying to build smaller, in-town houses, cluster housing, or well-designed pocket communities, and aim some of it at seniors. Because if they find a place to move, that frees up the house that they've been in the last 30 years. So I see it as challenges, but I also see some incredible opportunities.
Thank you, Bill. You all are touching on nerves here. We're starting to get some questions, not nerves in a bad way, but starting to generate questions. I'm holding back the tension that I feel to start asking those questions and move through the set first and give Adam the opportunity, Dan, and then Elizabeth. And if we could keep your responses to successes and challenges relatively slim so that we can get into some of these other questions as well, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Adam.
Sure. Probably I'll start with the challenge first. One of the biggest challenges we face in my organization is that we don't directly work in housing. And yet it's one of the biggest limiting agents to what we do in our goals. So what we know to be 100% absolutely true is that the leading limiting agent to our ability to grow the economy is directly tied to our ability to provide appropriate housing that helps reverse decades of population decline? Or is it that we know the limiting agent to the health and vibrancy of our economy is the ability to support our citizens in our decreasing population? So are they leaving because there's not housing? Are they not coming because there's not housing? And which is it? And this chicken and egg can paralyze us. And we really have to understand how to get around that. So as we've already heard tonight, the region and the state has a lot of great tools to help encourage the development of housing, mostly affordable housing. So if we can take that same premise and translate that across all spectrums for all housing, not taking away anything from the affordable housing efforts, additive, new support. So what we know in economic development is that you can take a going concern, a good company that has to grow in order to stay competitive in the market. They need more space. Say it costs $200 a square foot to build that space. The day they're done, it's worth under $100 a square foot. So, Dan's in his bank and no bank is going to lend into that. So there's this gap. So we've had to go out and help these companies who are employing people, growing employment, to find the capital to get that project done. And that's typically federal resources that come into that stack to get the project done. So very similar to economic development, we need to take that same mindset and apply it across all housing for all and close that gap. And if we can all agree that we're not fighting each other for resources, we're fighting together to bring that outside capital to the region to get those projects that wouldn't otherwise get done. So I'll leave it there, Josh.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. Moving, Dan.
Sure, thanks. So very quickly, in terms of successes in housing, for me, it is every time we provide a mortgage to somebody who is buying their very first home, and watching them walk out of the closing with a set of keys in their hands. And it's a tremendous feeling to know that they've accomplished, what for many is the American dream of home ownership. So that really is what I see every time that happens as a success. The challenges, and Bill touched on this, I think very well, is it is both the best time to be buying a home because of the tremendously inexpensive cost of capital. My first mortgage, I can remember paying 11 7/8. And to be able to borrow 30-year fixed rate money at just over 3% or at 3%, it's the best time to buy a house. Now, good luck. Go find a house that you can buy and go find a house that you can afford to buy. We do quite a bit with the USDA and their first-time home buyers where you can get up to 103%. But there are income limitations on that a lot of people don't meet. I walk into the head of the mortgage lending office at the bank and I see stacks of files piled up. And what are all those? These are all the people that we couldn't give mortgages to because they have bad credit. And that's a big thing. We see a lot of people who have just not paid close attention to their credit. And we can't help with that. They don't have down payments and they don't qualify for a first-time home buyer 100% financing through USDA. There's an equity builder program where we can get a $15,000 grant for them, which becomes free that they can use for down payment, but there are even more income restrictions on that. So it is this challenge of rents are so terribly expensive in our marketplace, if you can find a place to rent, and yet people can't get a mortgage because you look at what's available for sale. I look to see in Windham County, there's less than 100 homes in the entire county, single-family homes, under $250,000. And some of these are in places that you're going to be commuting a long way to work. So it's a huge challenge to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dan. And Elizabeth, back to you.
Okay, I'll start with the success. And I kind of went to our strategic plan to see, because we do have success indicators that we look at every year. And, most of them are defined in terms of community impact. So we're always looking at number of new homeowners that we help each year. We also look at what percentage of those homeowners are buying within the affordable range, because that's part of our mission, is to really help people make good choices and buy what they can actually afford. And so that's considered 30% of their income. So we're tracking how many people are buying and their housing ratio is falling within that range. We also have just this year started tracking, what's our impact on the market in the target population that we're trying to serve. So out of all the homeowners that bought within a certain range, we sort of look at it in terms of pricing. So all the homeowners that bought within a certain pricing in Windham County, how many of them actually went through our program? Because our program teaches people how to make good choices and make sure that they're making affordable choices. In 2019, it was 22%. So that's a nice chunk of the market. We felt that was our first baseline. So we're going to be tracking that because, we're not just interested in the transaction. We want to make sure that people can actually afford the home once they get those keys. We do a lot around credit repair. And so really helping people meet those pre-home buying goals are really critical. As Dan said, he's got that stack of files on the desk of people that they can't help. So we do a lot of work. Sometimes it can take years to get people to repair credit. And those, I have to say, are some of the most satisfying moments when we've been working with somebody for maybe 2 years and their credit is finally in a place that they can afford, and we can get them either to the bank with a down payment assistance program or to USDA that has a really affordable interest rate. So that we consider that a huge success. We look at energy efficiency, building materials in our housing development work. We look at like our ability to draw federal and state resources into our communities and how well we're doing that. And I'd say this organization has done a really nice job in making sure that our communities get their fair share of the larger pie of community resources that are available. And then I think I mentioned this earlier, you know, we look at the percentage of our portfolio of people that have experienced homelessness in the past as a marker of whether we're providing homes for folks at all levels of the economic spectrum. And then I just want to talk a little bit about what happens after people get a home, whether they're a homeowner or whether they're a renter, because this is a piece of the housing system that we haven't really talked about much, and this might tee up the conversation about the housing system. You know, with the defunding of the social service community, we've seen a lot of both homeowners and renters in a variety of different crises that they face. And they don't have the supports anymore that they used to have. And so that has shown up in our rental programs and in our home ownership programs. And so it's really critical that there is capacity to support people when they hit a bump in the road. There are so many people that are living very close to their budget margins. And so they're one emergency away from a housing crisis, whether they're a homeowner or a renter. You know, when you look at the intersection between the high rents and the housing system and people being able to move from a renter to a homeowner, you know, the super high rents in the community paired with lower incomes do affect people's credit because they may have an emergency that they just can't address immediately and their credit gets dinged. It affects their ability to save for that down payment. And so you get a lot of people that are paying rents that could be close to what they would be paying in a mortgage, but they just can't make that leap from from renter to home ownership. And then when they do, and they are ready, a lot of what we're seeing is even if the price is there and they can afford the price of the home, often those homes have so much deferred maintenance that there's a hidden price that isn't part of the sale price. And it's usually around $50,000. You know, it's a new heating system, it's energy efficiency upgrades, it's, you know, windows, a roof, you know, some of the really big ticket items that add up when you put them all together. And so, so the intersection of those two things are really critical. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we see. But I guess going back to the person once they're in the home, and that it's interesting when we talk about supportive services, most of the time we're focused on rental properties and renters that really need the support from Groundworks Collaborative or SEVCA or any of the number of organizations that we work with. But we see some of the same exact issues with older folks in our rehab program, where folks don't have the capacity to manage a project to maintain their housing stability. They may have mental health issues that are untreated, and we come in to try to help them fix their roof, and lo and behold, we discover all kinds of other challenges that they may be having, and we do our best to address them. And I think you'll see a trend with the whole housing industry starting to hire social workers as part of their property management teams, because there just isn't that infrastructure anymore in the mental health community to meet the need. And so housing organizations are starting to get really creative about how to deliver services where people live. And that's been one of our biggest challenges. And then sort of challenges internally at the housing level. There's a lot of bureaucracy associated with our world. And as much as we, I think, have done a really nice job of providing really high quality homes, some of the some of the nicest homes in our community are owned by the Housing Trust. And I remember when I first got hired at the Housing Trust, I came in as the director of homeownership, and Tim Callahan was the director of property management at the time. And he started driving me around to see some of our rental units, and I would go by a house and I'd say, oh, that's a beautiful home. It's got, nice historic details and it's looking really well kept. And he said, oh yeah, that's one of the Housing Trust homes. And we'd go down another street and I'd point out another home. But it's ironic that, we have these beautiful homes in our portfolio, but sometimes they're just the barrier to get in with all the bureaucracy and we don't have a ton of control over that. So that's sort of a systems barrier that we grapple with all the time. But I do think it makes it harder for people to access some of our housing, and we're aware of that, and we try to work hard to minimize it, but it is there. There's a whole lot of COVID-related challenges, but I'm going to wait for Josh to tee up that conversation.
That's right.
And,
let's pause there. I think we have a few questions that have come in, and I do want to note that the way that you described the renter experiencing the high rents with the ambition of wanting to get into housing and the challenges that are presented by not being able to accumulate the savings to be able to make that leap into housing. And once you do, the costs that maybe are unseen when you purchase a house, I think is something that I know I've experienced personally. And, the systems that you named are very familiar to me, which is why I was smiling. So let me just go through questions as they came in. And so, Emily, kudos to you for utilizing the chat as well to ask a question. But the first question tonight comes from John Sicoccio, who asks Adam and Emily, can state level programs be geared toward, that are geared toward economic development be pivoted towards housing because of this? Housing is such a critical piece of sustaining our workforce.
Emily, you want me to go first, or would you like to address that first? Statewide, probably the largest pool of funds that is used for grants in both housing and economic development is called the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant. And these are actually federal dollars that come into the state and flow through the state. Historically, the majority of those have been provided to housing projects, as we've heard today. A lot of those dollars have funded projects in Windham County over the years. In recent years, some of that has become more available for economic development, but I believe still the majority of the CDBG funds do support housing. Some of the other programs that are out there for economic development, most recently is the Northern Border Regional Commission, which became available for statewide implementation just last year. Other than those two programs, there aren't really grant programs for economic development. There's incentives for businesses to grow employment, which is the VEGI, Vermont Employment Growth Incentive. And we won't get into the weeds on that here today, but it is not something that could just pivot to housing because it's based directly on wages paid to employees. But otherwise, the state of Vermont really doesn't have a lot of direct incentive programs for economic development projects.
I would agree with Adam, and that most of our funding for any of these projects, whether it's economic development or housing, comes from federal funds and federal programs. And the state coffers leave very little wiggle room for innovative work. And that's one of the reasons that sort of the revenue opportunities and new folks moving to the community is really exciting. But I want to sort of take a step back because this is a problem that we wrestle with. And I think it's important in the arena of housing, but it's also important in the arena of childcare. And they're very similar challenges in that we know that some of the biggest challenges that business owners, employers, and employees face are around housing, access to childcare, healthcare costs, family medical leave costs, those kinds of sort of, I like to call them social infrastructure costs. And we know that if we could fix those challenges or improve those situations, we would see tremendous growth in economic development. But that doesn't mean that folks who sort of have vested interest in the game and economic development want to give up their economic development funds in order to sort of put it in this other pot that's further upstream. Because that's like a 20-year out investment sometimes, investing in childcare or housing or something like that, before you see the economic gains from it. Not before you see benefits to the community, but before you really see the economic gains. And so it's really hard, I think, in any conversation, any community, but particularly in state government, to find the funds and to find the political will to invest in both today and tomorrow, because you know you're going to save money down the road. And I think that's really what we're going to need to do if we're going to see things like housing development and childcare and family medical leave as real economic development issues and not just social issues.
Yeah, I would just add, that, the best way to make things more affordable is for people to be able to earn more, and that really is one of the challenges we have with the declining population, with a stagnating economy, with the homes that are depreciating in value instead of increasing in value. We used to have a system where you could acquire a home and gain wealth. Here, that's really, a lot of that's gone away. And we really want to be able to grow that economy, and it shouldn't be subtractive, it should be additive. Again, Vermont really has almost no state funded economic development programs that are specific to projects. So even if you took away every dollar, it wouldn't really be enough. So instead we should be working together to say, no, we need to bring more resources here. How can we do that?
Thank you. I'm monitoring, and so I'm listening and monitoring at the same time. I have a few questions queued up, but I think, Emily, the question that you ask is really intriguing, and that's the next one in the queue when I find it. Or actually, why don't you ask it?
Sorry to jump the line for other people who have questions too. Bill said something about a healthy housing market, and I'm thinking back on the 20 plus years that I've lived here. And I remember a time where it felt like it was much more affordable to buy a house, but renting was still really hard. And now we're in today where renting and buying are both practically impossible. And so I hear stories from people about, in the 60s and 70s, people would move here and buy a farmhouse on a lark, and now they have all this capital. But I imagine that for the people who are already living here, it didn't really feel like that. So what is a healthy housing market?
I mean, in general, the market here has been pretty stable. And I define healthy as appreciation that ties in with somebody doing work to improve a property, and so therefore it's worth a little more than it was last year, or just not these wild swings of buy it, do nothing, and just get lucky, and you can sell it the next year and make $50,000. That's not typically what we've experienced here. We go through 10 to 15 year cycles of slow appreciation, which I think is healthy. And then we will hit a blip in 1986, 87. The stock market went wild. It was also the beginning of people starting to look at real estate as not the house that I raised my family in, but part of my investment portfolio. And it was also when the secondary mortgage market started to get involved in making money, lending mortgage money. And then the market crashed in October of 1987, and the market here basically is driven by markets elsewhere, and its stock stalls in its tracks. And then slowly in 1990 through 2000, we saw slow appreciation. The balance of buyers and sellers was more equitable. And then 2000 to 2006, we saw this next blip of investment in real estate, people moving here. In many cases, there were people who had lived in a house elsewhere for 30 years, raised their kids, and then said, I've always wanted to move to Vermont. And then that crashed and then we've been on this slow growth And the fact that the population has been pretty stagnant, the one change, I think, and I can't support this with data, is that we have maybe the same number of people, but a greater number of smaller households. It's not mom, dad, 3.5 kids and a golden retriever. It's a single person in a household, or it's, smaller households that still need a greater number of roofs over their heads. So that's been one of the challenges. The other thing that makes this thing so complicated is the fact that our property taxes are really high. And we support incredibly good, valuable programs with our property taxes. As one of the questioners said, rents and purchasing are too high for people who don't make a lot of money. And she's absolutely right. But I think we need to try and figure out a way to increase people's income rather than try and discount things below what it really costs to create them, or the way that part of our real estate taxes now are rebates to people who have a house but don't have income enough to pay the higher property tax. And in some ways, those who have the ability to pay a higher tax are paying it, but that's not sustainable in terms of how do you then attract those businesses to move here, to increase salaries, to have a healthier mix of housing and economic resources. So it's really tied in together. I mean, there's another question in here that says, I have an extremely large problem with framing issues of creditworthy and housing affordability as questions and failings of personal choice and personal responsibility, and not as symptoms of socio-cultural economic system. And she's absolutely right, but we're not going to change the economic system of the entire United States at this moment, even though there's constant discussion. There seem to be more people paying attention to that. But the erosion of the middle class is really evident when you look at much of what we're talking about here. And I think that's where, when Adam's trying to find companies to locate here that can pay people a living wage, that's why it's all tied together.
Mm-hmm. Let me pivot to our Q&A. And we had 2 questions on here from Ryan, one from Ryan, one from Doug. And thanks for being patient, Ryan and Doug. Both around questions around innovation in housing. From Ryan, I'm not sure if panelists can see it, but what are the potential barriers to a downtown multi-unit rental building becoming a housing cooperative? Particularly interested in both zoning and financing perspectives. So we'll start there, and then there's another question around innovation after that one. So again, multi-unit rental building becoming a housing cooperative. What are the ways in which to do that, if there are?
Well, I'll speak a little bit about what I know, Josh, and that is, from a financing standpoint, there are no barriers to financing that type of property. There are not many cooperative ownership properties in the state of Vermont. I think there might be 1 or 2 up in the Burlington area, but that may be it. Certainly, it's a very popular form of home ownership in larger metropolitan areas. New York City, has co-ops everywhere. They have more co-ops than they have condominiums. But unless there is a zoning restriction, which I don't believe there is,
I don't think so.
There's no reason not to pursue a cooperative type of ownership project. And certainly, speaking for the bank, it's something that we absolutely love to explore ways to make that happen.
There is one interesting barrier to it that we're working on in the legislature, but haven't gotten all the way on. And as for the zoning, I think it's important for folks who are in Brattleboro to know that we have some of the most innovative progressive zoning with regards to housing in the state, are really at the front lines of that, and have a lot of folks to thank for that. But one of the barriers is we have a fairly, not as progressive as it could be, but progressive, small p, not political, but meaning mathematically progressive tax system around property taxes in Vermont. And a cooperative housing model makes the progressive taxation a little bit complicated if the folks who are living in that co-op are at very different income levels, because anything that's sort of owned jointly, it becomes complicated to figure out who is paying the taxes on that and what the tax burden is. And so that's something that we're working on resolving. We figured out how to do on sort of jointly held properties with separate buildings, but in one building, I think we still haven't cracked that nut.
Thank you, Emily.
I see one of the barriers as just being the cost of construction and putting together a financing package that works. One of the reasons why there isn't a lot of construction in Vermont is just that the economics don't work. And if you look at who's building the majority of housing in Vermont, it's the nonprofit sector, and that's because there's deep subsidies that come with that, come with our projects. Even looking at the Brooks House, which is higher rents for folks that can afford that, and it's a beautiful property, that had some deep subsidies as well with the low-income housing tax, not the low-income housing tax, but the new market tax credits. And I think there were some other layers of subsidy in that project too. So even that level of market rate housing needed some support in order to get it off the ground. So that's one of the biggest barriers, is just the cost of construction is not keeping pace with what people can afford to buy.
Which that really ties into Doug's question about innovative housing design work being done to provide housing at a lower cost. And I think part of that is there anything being done to bring down the cost of housing, or is there any hope there of building new housing, since that's one of the issues that we're facing?
You know, one of the things that we're working on right now is some of you may know, we have an option to buy a piece of land in Putney that's right next to the Putney Food Co-op. And we've been working with the farmers market and the Putney community gardens on a common vision for that parcel, and have been working with them for the last year. And we're coming to the end of that phase of our planning and moving into more of a traditional pre-feasibility phase around the construction costs. And one of the things that we're exploring around dropping the cost of housing is to do a manufactured product that's built in a warehouse instead of on the ground in Putney itself, as a way to bring the cost down. We're just going out to bid to work with a company on that type of model. It's different than what happens for traditional affordable housing in Vermont. And we've been working with our funders to, get a clear pathway to try this out, but just trying to see if we can leverage, our state and federal dollars a little bit more efficiently with this approach, and still come up with a community that looks a lot like a Vermont neighborhood. So we're just embarking on this right now. And so it'll be interesting to follow that. The sort of hypothesis is that by trying this out instead of stick built on the ground, we can save some money. And so we're going to give it a shot in this location and see what happens. So we'll report back what we find as we go through the process.
Can I add something to that, Josh?
I was going to ask you if you would.
For folks in Brattleboro who haven't ever been up through Mountain Home, it's a really incredible community of housing, and beautiful winding roads and trees, and sort of I don't think it's what people imagine when they, usually when you say a mobile home park on the side of the road, it's much more linear and boxy than that. And that kind of housing can be a really inexpensive model, but we wind up in the situation around climate and heating and all of those challenges and appreciation that Bill talked about. And so there are technologies that are coming on that I assume is sort of what you're looking at, Elizabeth, but to really make those homes be warm and efficient and
well, Emily, it's also almost impossible to get financing for that type of home.
Because they don't appreciate, right? They depreciate too fast.
They don't appreciate the quality of construction. creates issues for it. It's a whole host of issues.
And so there's some tech, yeah, it's an interesting puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when I'm talking about this Putney project, we're not thinking about a traditional mobile home product. It's more around the construction process that we're changing up. Instead of constructing them on the ground locally, we're talking about having them constructed off-site and then brought in. So, but it's not a mobile home product that we're talking about.
I mean, and one thing is, as more and more people are open to the whole tiny house movement and the idea of nobody wants to build a McMansion. People are talking about, I mean, when people talk about the too small house, their standard versus what we might be talking about is bigger. I feel like if somebody would put the money into design and small, then you can put funds into energy efficiency and build in some of those things, which tends to cost more, but it means over the life of the house, you're spending less to heat it. Unity Homes in Westmoreland, Ted Benson's company, does incredible off-site panel homes. They're not inexpensive. They're beautiful and they're really well built. And I forget there's another company in Vermont that perhaps you're talking to that. So I think that's a brilliant approach. But it still becomes a challenge of, trying to pay people a decent wage to build. It's that same, you want to pay people well, but you want to keep the price down. It's really hard to do.
It's really hard.
So on that, very quickly, Bill, we financed a Unity home a few years ago. Total cost of the project was $440,000. We had a certified green appraiser do the appraisal to make sure that they took into consideration all of the energy efficiency aspects of it. And even with that, it only appraised for $325,000. So $115,000 less than the cost. And now you're talking about, that $115,000 that you have to put down, now you're gonna have to put down another $64,000 or $65,000.
And even those green appraisers are very, very hard to find. That's not how usually, appraisers are trained. And so we're trying to do some work to get everyone up to speed on that kind of information.
We had to get one from the Montpelier area and he charged $1,000.
I mean, when you talk about the quality of construction and the cost of construction, Brattleboro's really lucky. Windham and Windsor Housing Trust, those houses have been renovated and put in better shape than any private individual could afford to have done it. The Brooks House block, if it weren't for the fact that we had local people who were committed to Brattleboro, that project would never have been done.
It'd be a parking lot.
It's a little bit more European approach to time frame. It's not, can we pay the mortgage off in 30 years? It's a much longer, and so somebody trying to make money on housing and, eliminate them. But even a nonprofit or a cooperative trying to do this work, you're still talking huge sums of money to do it well. And I think that's kind of the challenge, and that's where the economic development component of it is so crucial.
Yeah, I feel, and Danny, I see you're coming back, but just to start to get into this chicken and egg thing that we need more housing, but it's too expensive to build, but man, we need more housing.
Right.
We have subsidies for folks that are sitting in the motels right now that if there was housing that we could put them into, we would be able to do that right now, and yet the units are not available.
Yeah.
And so we dance around. And so, Danny, welcome back.
Hey, Josh, if I can, I did see a question about the USDA loans, and I just wanted
to thank you. Yes.
Try and answer that for Ryan. To my knowledge, you cannot use the USDA first-time homebuyer program to buy a multi-family property. You may be able to buy a 1 to 4 family property that you're going to occupy, and Elizabeth may know more about this, but you could not buy a mixed use or commercial type building with that.
Yeah, I've been out of the direct counseling for a while now, so I'm not 100% sure I know the answer to that, but I believe you're right, Dan. I think it's really geared towards owner-occupied
But Ryan, if you want to,
homes and not.
I think you were going to say, Dan.
Call me at work. You're welcome to give me a call, and I will get you the absolute correct answer.
And if there's any resources for folks looking for starting a cooperative in a building downtown, connecting with Ryan Stratton, if you could post any information in the chat, that would be great.
I just wanted to follow up on I wanted to ask a question. There's a piece here that I feel I must be just missing something fundamental. And Josh, you were just reiterating, it was the point Bill was making earlier, which is there's not enough housing, but the economics of building new housing are not such that that's not economically viable, at least in anything close to the short run. I don't understand how those two facts can live side by side. How could we have such a shortage of supply and it not be economically viable to build new? Is it that it's wildly expensive to build new in our area for some reason, like much more so than other areas?
It's not.
I don't think it's more widely expensive than other areas. I think construction is high all over. It has to do with local wages and just the juxtaposition of what it costs and what people can afford to pay. And we, Adam can probably speak to this better than I can, but our economy doesn't have the traditional high wage jobs that you see in other markets that have higher priced housing. And so the equation just doesn't work with what people can afford and what it costs to build. And so it doesn't make sense for a private developer to develop housing because, Dan just gave an example of how much it cost and it didn't even appraise that high of a home that he was working with. So it just doesn't, there's no incentive for the private market to get into the housing business, which is why we're one of the nonprofit who can draw down these subsidies are really making up the bulk of the housing, driving the housing industry in Vermont, which is not ideal. We would want to see a variety of houses getting built for a variety of incomes, but
yeah, I think
that's why the economic development programs that Adam's working on is so critical. And just to throw my 2 cents in about whether we should redirect all the money to housing, I don't believe that. I think that it's the whole system and all of these things need to be supported because they're so interconnected.
In the public housing sector, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Elizabeth, but most of those projects are designed such that there is no debt. The only way it works is, they're trying to really get to a place where once it's built, they're not carrying debt. Any of that revenue is going back into capital improvements over time. It's going to the next project. And that's not a way in which the private sector can work. So because we're such a low density market, every unit you build, it comes with severe risk if you can't move that. In a more developed market where there's a lot more churn, you're able to spread that risk over a greater number of units. So therefore the private equity capital goes to where those communities are, where it's a potential return. If not, at least you're not risking as much. So we're really at a double jeopardy here as far as, we've got two challenges. We've got to get that capital in, and then you actually have to sell the unit. And then we have the stagnant population, which also feeds into the stagnant wages. So, what we have to do is we have to get more people here, and then we have to build the housing at the very same moment they arrive. And then we have to get more capital to do it. And then it feeds itself and creates a really virtuous cycle and circle. And that's a thriving economy.
And
I just want to clarify one thing that Adam said. So across Vermont, it's not true that every affordable housing project does not carry debt. It really varies by market and even by project. And so in our market, we try not to carry debt because it just doesn't, the feasibility, the financial feasibility of the project doesn't work typically. But there are other markets in Vermont, but they're primarily in Burlington where you can get higher rents and you can, you can build higher scale projects. So it really does vary by location.
I do know that, and I know this only because we do have a home there in southeastern Georgia that turned the key for under $125 a square foot. It's half of what it's going to cost you here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing another, there are a number of places in Vermont's infrastructure where we see, because of our density, because of a few other factors, we see a market failure. Housing is one of them. Broadband is another. There's quite, there are a few others. So there isn't the market incentive for it. So when Bill described what a healthy housing market looked like, that was, where supply and demand is working out. But this is a place where the law of supply and demand doesn't really apply to making this work. And so I think in some reality, it might be helpful to admit that to ourselves and say, where are we, hemorrhaging money because we have this market failure? Motels, the amount we're spending on motels is a great example. Maybe we should be investing that money to just admit that this is a place where we really need government to step in, where we really need to be thinking innovatively, where something's got to give, and it's not necessarily that we're going to find sort of the magic solution in the market.
So I just want to talk a little bit about the rental rehab program that is funded through it's CARES Act money coming through this CDBG program, and it's directed to private landlords to help increase the quality of their private rental homes. And there's a lot of discussion amongst housing advocates of whether that's a good use of public resources because it's going to private landlords. And I'm probably one of the more vocal supporters of the approach, primarily because of what you just said, Emily. I just think there's the economics of private rental housing is really challenging. And I do think that there are many private landlords that need that support. And so we're delighted that we're administering that program. It's on a very fast time frame because it's CARES Act money that needs to get spent by the end of the year. But we've got 55 new units in the pipeline with that program. And many of them have been offline for a really long time because the just economics of rehabbing them and getting them online weren't working. Some of them are brand new commercial spaces that are being turned into rental spaces. And then a small handful are units that are actually already online, but they're in such substandard conditions that they qualified for the program. So I do think that you're seeing some money being directed towards the private market. And I think that balance is really healthy. And I'm glad that we're a part of that effort, that we can administer those funds and help just increase the quality of housing even beyond what we're renting ourselves.
And that's one reason why I hate to see any kind of stress and frustration between landlords and tenants, people moving in and locals. We're all people. Everybody's just trying to put a roof over their heads. And the landlords in the town of Brattleboro are paying pretty significant portion of the real estate taxes that are supporting a lot of these things that are benefiting tenants and everybody else. We're all in it together.
I'm going to jump in because that seems like a great statement to end on, even though I know we can, this has been totally fascinating for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. And seems like we could go on and on, but I think we should pause here. And I hope that people who weren't able to tune in tonight, maybe you all can share the video or so on with other groups and that you think might be interested in the discussion that took place here tonight. I personally, I just found it so illuminating, and I'm so grateful to each of you for taking this time and for doing the work that you're all doing to improve this situation in our area. And thank you, Josh, for helping to pull this all together.
Absolutely. It was more just asking
skillfully
questions
managing the whole thing.
and let it
Yeah.
roll. And I do think I agree with you. I think this could be part one of a multi-part series and have different people that are coming in sharing experiences from their vantage point of the housing system. And as Emily points out, there's so much that's even going on right now with COVID that we didn't even get to scratch the surface of that. So who knows, that we might see this group come back together pretty soon and have a part two.
Josh, I would mention to Danny that I saw there was a Facebook question from Pamela Simmons about a tiny house community. And again, I'm happy to have a conversation with her about how that might work from a financing standpoint, if she wants to get in touch with me at the bank. Happy to
Thank
follow.
you, Dan. Thank you for that. And panelists, if you get a chance later on, you might go find the video on Facebook, because there are a lot of comments written in there as well, not all of which got sent over here, but worth reading. So on behalf of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, I can't thank you enough. And I just want to put out a pitch for those of you who haven't had a chance to come see the exhibits that are up here at the museum that have kind of, provided the platform for all of this exploration we've been doing around housing and homelessness. Those exhibits are just up through Monday. It's turning out to not be difficult to be here and be safe and socially distant. And you can go online and make a reservation for when you want to come, or just walk up when we're open, which is Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. We'd love for you to have a chance to see those exhibits. Thank you again, everyone. Look forward to seeing you all soon, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
See you all later.
Thanks for being here.